The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Millbrook, a small town where everybody knew everybody else. Sarah Martinez was walking her golden retriever, Charlie, along the old hiking trail that ran behind the abandoned warehouse district. The 10-year-old girl had taken this route hundreds of times before, but today something felt different. Charlie kept pulling at his leash, whining in a way Sarah had never heard before. Sarah tried to calm him down, but Charlie was insistent. His ears were perked up, and he kept looking toward a cluster of thick bushes near the old Miller property. The property had been empty for years, ever since the factory closed down. Most people in town avoided this area because it looked run down and forgotten. But Charlie would not stop pulling, his paws digging into the dirt path as he strained against the leash. Finally, Sarah decided to follow him. She pushed through the overgrown weeds and brambles, her small hands getting scratched by thorns. That was when she saw him. An elderly man was lying on the ground, partially hidden by the bushes. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his hands and feet were tied with rough rope. There was dried blood on his forehead, and his face was pale and drawn. Sarah's heart started racing. She had never seen anything like this before. The old man's eyes were half closed, and he seemed barely conscious. Sarah wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Charlie approached the man carefully, sniffing around him and whimpering softly. The dog's gentle behavior helped Sarah calm down enough to think clearly. She knew she needed to get help, but she also knew the man might not have much time. His breathing was shallow and labored. Sarah knelt down beside him, her hands shaking. She remembered what her mother had taught her about staying calm in emergencies. She gently touched the man's shoulder and said his name, though she did not know it. The man's eyes flickered open for just a moment, and he looked at her with a mixture of pain and relief. He tried to speak, but only a weak whisper came out. Sarah could not understand what he was saying, but she could see the desperation in his eyes. Charlie stayed close to the man, as if trying to offer comfort. The dog licked the man's hand gently, and Sarah saw the old man's fingers twitch slightly in response. She knew she had to act fast. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal in this part of town. The old warehouse district had always been a dead zone for cell reception. Sarah felt a wave of panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. She looked around and noticed that the man had been lying there for what must have been hours, maybe even longer. The ropes around his wrists and ankles were tight, cutting into his skin. Sarah tried to untie them, but the knots were too complex and too tight for her small fingers to manage. She realized that whoever had done this to the old man had wanted to make sure he could not escape. The thought sent chills down her spine. Sarah made a decision. She could not leave the man alone, but she also could not help him by herself. She needed to find someone who could help, and she needed to do it quickly. She looked at Charlie and said firmly that they needed to go get help. But as she started to stand up, the old man grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. His grip was weak, but his intent was clear. He did not want her to leave him alone. Sarah understood his fear. She sat back down and held his hand, telling him that she would not leave him. She would stay right there until help arrived. But how would help arrive if she could not call anyone? Sarah's mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do. Then she had an idea. She took off her bright red jacket and tied it to a nearby branch where it could be seen from the main road. Maybe someone passing by would notice it and come to investigate. Charlie seemed to understand that something was wrong. The dog sat down next to the old man, resting his head on the man's chest as if listening to his heartbeat. Sarah stroked Charlie's fur and whispered encouragement to both of them. She told the old man that everything would be okay, even though she was not sure if that was true. She told him that people would come soon, that he just needed to hold on a little longer. Time seemed to move slowly. Sarah kept checking her phone, hoping that maybe a signal would appear, but nothing changed. She could hear cars passing on the distant highway, but they were too far away to notice them. The morning was growing warmer, and Sarah worried about the man getting dehydrated. She had a small water bottle in her backpack, and she carefully lifted his head to give him small sips. The water seemed to revive him slightly. His eyes opened a bit wider. The old man tried to speak again, and this time Sarah leaned in close to hear him. His voice was hoarse and broken, but she caught fragments of what he was saying. He mentioned something about his wife, about needing to get home, about someone who had done this to him. Sarah did not understand everything, but she promised him that she would make sure he got home safely. She promised that whoever had hurt him would not get away with it. Charlie suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the trail. His ears perked up, and he let out a soft bark. Sarah followed his gaze and saw someone walking in the distance. It was Mr. Henderson, the retired postal worker who lived 3 blocks from Sarah's house. He walked this trail every morning, but usually much earlier. Sarah jumped to her feet and started waving her arms frantically. Shouting for help as loud as she could, Mr. Henderson stopped and squinted in their direction. At first he looked confused, but then he saw Sarah's desperate gestures and started walking faster toward them. When he pushed through the bushes and saw the scene before him, his face went pale. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. His hands were shaking as he described the situation to the dispatcher, giving them the exact location as best as he could. Within minutes, Sarah could hear sirens in the distance. The sound grew louder and louder until police cars and an ambulance pulled up along the access road near the warehouse. Paramedics rushed through the bushes with their equipment, and Sarah stepped back to give them room to work. She watched as they quickly assessed the old man's condition, checking his vital signs and carefully cutting away the ropes that bound him. The police officers began taking photographs and marking the area as a crime scene. One of the paramedics, a kind woman named Lisa, knelt down next to Sarah and asked if she was okay. Sarah nodded, but her legs felt weak, and she realized she was trembling. Lisa put a blanket around her shoulders and told her that she had done something very brave. The paramedic explained that the old man's condition was serious, but because Sarah had stayed with him and kept him calm, he had a much better chance of recovery. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she was not sure if they were tears of relief or fear. The police questioned Sarah gently, asking her exactly what had happened and when she had found the man. Sarah told them everything she could remember, including Charlie's unusual behavior and how he had led her to the spot. The officers looked impressed, and one of them bent down to pat Charlie on the head, calling him a hero dog. Charlie wagged his tail, seeming to understand the praise even in the midst of all the chaos. As the paramedics prepared to transport the old man to the hospital, he reached out his hand toward Sarah. She stepped forward and took it, and he squeezed her fingers weakly. His lips moved, and she leaned in to hear him whisper a single word, "Thank you." Sarah felt a surge of emotion and squeezed his hand back, telling him that he was going to be okay now. The paramedics carefully lifted him onto a stretcher and carried him to the ambulance. Mr. Henderson stayed with Sarah while the police continued their investigation. He told her that her parents had been called and were on their way. Sarah sat on a fallen log, still wrapped in the blanket, with Charlie lying at her feet. She watched as the officers combed through the area, looking for any clues about who might have hurt the old man and why. They found pieces of torn fabric, footprints, and what looked like drag marks leading from a nearby road. Sarah's mother arrived within 20 minutes, her face filled with worry and fear. She rushed to Sarah and pulled her into a tight hug, asking if she was hurt or scared. Sarah admitted that she had been scared, but she also felt proud that she had been able to help someone who desperately needed it. Her mother thanked Mr. Henderson for staying with Sarah and thanked the police for their quick response. Everyone seemed to agree that Sarah and Charlie had saved the old man's life. The story quickly spread through Millbrook. By afternoon, neighbors were stopping by the Martinez house to check on Sarah and to hear what had happened. The local newspaper called asking for an interview, and the television news from the nearby city sent a reporter to cover the story. Sarah's father came home from work early, and the family sat together in the living room. Processing everything that had happened that morning, Sarah could not stop thinking about the old man. She wondered who he was, why someone would hurt him like that, and whether he had a family who was worried about him. She asked her parents if they could find out how he was doing at the hospital. Her father made some calls and learned that the man was stable, but still in serious condition. The hospital would not release his name or any other information because the investigation was ongoing. That evening, Detective Rachel Torres from the Millbrook Police Department came to the Martinez house. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. She told Sarah that she was leading the investigation and wanted to ask a few more questions. Sarah's parents sat with her as the detective asked about every detail Sarah could remember. Did she see anyone else in the area? Did the old man say anything that might identify who hurt him? Were there any vehicles nearby? Sarah tried her best to remember everything, but she had been so focused on the old man that she had not noticed much else. She did remember that Charlie had been unusually alert even before they found the man, as if he had sensed something was wrong from far away. Detective Torres seemed very interested in this detail. She asked about the exact route Sarah and Charlie had taken and whether they walked that way every day. The detective explained that the old man had been reported missing by his wife the previous evening. His name was Robert Callahan, and he was 73 years old. He had left his house to take a walk around the neighborhood after dinner, something he did every evening. When he did not return after an hour, his wife had called the police. Officers had searched the area around his home but had not thought to look near the abandoned warehouse district because it was over 2 miles from where he lived. Sarah asked how Mr. Callahan had ended up so far from his home. Detective Torres said that was one of the main questions they were trying to answer. Based on the evidence at the scene, it appeared that he had been taken there by someone, possibly in a vehicle. The ropes used to bind him were not common household rope, but rather heavy-duty cord that might be used in construction or farming. The police were checking local hardware stores to see if anyone had recently purchased that type of material. The detective told Sarah that her quick thinking and Charlie's instincts had likely saved Mr. Callahan's life. If he had remained there much longer, especially with the temperature rising during the day, he might not have survived. Sarah felt a mix of emotions hearing this. She was glad that she had been able to help, but she also felt angry that someone would do such a terrible thing to an innocent old man. She asked the detective if they knew who was responsible. Detective Torres said they were following several leads but could not share specific details. She did say that they believed this was not a random act of violence. Someone had targeted Mr. Callahan specifically, and they needed to figure out why. The detective thanked Sarah again for her cooperation and told her to call immediately if she remembered anything else, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. She left her card on the kitchen table before heading out. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling strange. Everything seemed normal, but she could not shake the images from the previous day. She got dressed and went downstairs to find her parents already awake reading the local newspaper. Sarah's picture was on the front page, along with a photo of Charlie. The headline read, "Local girl and her dog save missing man." Sarah felt her cheeks flush as she read the article describing how she had found Mr. Callahan at school. Sarah became an instant celebrity. Her classmates crowded around her, asking questions and wanting to hear every detail of the story. Her teachers praised her courage, and the principal called her to the office to personally congratulate her. During lunch, Sarah sat with her best friends Emily and Marcus, who wanted to know what it felt like to be a hero. Sarah told them honestly that she did not feel like a hero. She had just done what anyone would have done in that situation, but Marcus disagreed. He pointed out that many people might have panicked or run away. Some might have called for help but not stayed with the injured person. Sarah's decision to stay with Mr. Callahan, even when she was scared and did not know what to do, had made all the difference. Emily added that Charlie deserved credit too, and the whole cafeteria agreed with a round of applause when she said it. Sarah smiled, thinking about her loyal dog waiting for her at home. After school, Sarah's mother told her that Mrs. Callahan, the old man's wife, had called. She wanted to meet Sarah and thank her personally. Sarah felt nervous about this. She was not good at accepting praise. She worried about what she would say to someone whose husband had been hurt so badly. But her mother reassured her that Mrs. Callahan just wanted to express her gratitude, and it would mean a lot to her to meet the girl who had saved her husband's life. They drove to the hospital that afternoon. Sarah held a card she had made for Mr. Callahan with drawings of flowers and a picture of Charlie on the front. Inside, she had written a simple message telling him to get better soon. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Sarah noticed how quiet everything was, broken only by the occasional beep of medical equipment and the soft voices of nurses. Talking to patients, Mrs. Callahan was waiting in the family room near the intensive care unit. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes that looked tired from crying. When she saw Sarah, she immediately stood up and walked over, pulling her into a gentle hug. Sarah could feel the woman trembling slightly, and she hugged her back. Not knowing what else to do, Mrs. Callahan thanked Sarah over and over, her voice breaking with emotion. She explained that Robert, her husband, had been awake for short periods and had been asking about the girl and the dog who had found him. The doctor said he was making progress, though he still had a long recovery ahead. He had suffered from dehydration, exposure, and some bruising and cuts, but nothing life-threatening thanks to how quickly he had been found and treated. Sarah gave Mrs. Callahan the card she had made, and the older woman's eyes filled with tears as she read it. She told Sarah that Robert had been a teacher for 40 years before retiring and that he loved children. He would be so happy to meet her. When he was feeling stronger, Mrs. Callahan also said something that surprised Sarah. She mentioned that Robert had been trying to tell the police something important about what had happened to him, but he was having trouble remembering clearly because of the trauma. This information made Sarah curious. Who would want to hurt a kind old teacher, and why? Mrs. Callahan seemed to sense Sarah's questions and sighed deeply. She explained that Robert had recently been involved in a dispute with a neighbor over property boundaries. The neighbor, a man named Dale Pritchard, had become increasingly aggressive and hostile over the past few months. Robert had even filed a complaint with the police after Pritchard had threatened him, however. Mrs. Callahan was quick to add that she did not want to accuse anyone without proof. The police were investigating, and they would figure out the truth. She just wanted Sarah to know how grateful she was and how much her bravery had meant to their family. She also mentioned that Robert's 3 children, who all lived in different states, were flying in to be with him. They all wanted to meet Sarah as well. Sarah and her mother stayed for about an hour, talking with Mrs. Callahan and offering their support. Before they left, a nurse came and said that Robert was awake and asking if the young girl was still there. The doctor gave permission for Sarah to visit him for just a few minutes. Sarah's heart raced as she followed the nurse down the hallway. Her mother, close behind Mr. Callahan's room, was filled with medical equipment, but he was sitting up slightly in his bed. His face was still bruised and swollen, and he had an IV in his arm, but his eyes were alert and warm. When he saw Sarah, he smiled weakly and held out his hand. Sarah approached carefully and took it. His voice was rough when he spoke, but his words were clear. He told her that she and her dog had saved his life, and he would never forget it. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. She told Mr. Callahan that she was glad Charlie had led her to him, and that she hoped he would recover soon. Mr. Callahan squeezed her hand gently and said something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. He said that in his 40 years of teaching, he had always tried to instill courage and compassion in his students. Seeing those qualities in such a young girl reminded him why he had loved his job so much. The visit was brief because Mr. Callahan needed to rest, but Sarah left feeling lighter somehow. Seeing him awake and talking made everything feel more real and more positive. On the drive home, her mother told her how proud she was. Sarah looked out the window at the familiar streets of Millbrook and thought about how different everything seemed now. Just 2 days ago, this had been an ordinary small town where nothing much happened. Now it felt like a place where important things were unfolding. That evening, Detective Torres called the Martinez house again. She wanted to update the family on the investigation. She told them that the police had brought Dale Pritchard in for questioning. Pritchard had a history of anger management issues and had recently been fired from his job at a construction company. The type of rope used to bind Mr. Callahan was consistent with materials found in Pritchard's garage. However, Pritchard was denying any involvement and had hired a lawyer. The detective explained that, without physical evidence directly linking Pritchard to the crime, or without a clear identification from Mr. Callahan himself, ending a case would be challenging. She said that forensic teams were processing evidence from the scene where Sarah had found Mr. Callahan, looking for fingerprints, DNA, or anything else that might help. In the meantime, they were also investigating whether anyone else might have had a reason to harm Mr. Callahan. Sarah asked if she and Charlie could do anything else to help. Detective Torres smiled over the phone and told her that she had already done more than enough. The most important thing now was for Sarah to stay safe and to let the professionals handle the rest. However, if Sarah remembered any additional details from that morning, even something that seemed unimportant, she should definitely call. Sarah promised that she would. Later that night, Sarah lay in bed with Charlie curled up at her feet. She kept replaying the events of the past 2 days in her mind. She thought about how Charlie had known something was wrong before she did. Dogs had instincts that humans did not always understand. She wondered if Charlie had heard Mr. Callahan calling for help from far away, or if he had sensed the man's fear and distress in some other way. Sarah also thought about Mr. Callahan and what he must have gone through. Being taken from his evening walk, tied up, and left in an isolated area must have been terrifying. She wondered if he had thought anyone would find him, or if he had begun to lose hope. The fact that he was a retired teacher who had dedicated his life to helping young people made the crime seem even more senseless and cruel. Over the next few days, the town of Millbrook seemed to buzz with activity. News crews from regional stations came to interview residents, and reporters tried to piece together what had happened. Sarah's family politely declined most interview requests, wanting to protect Sarah from too much attention. However, they did agree to one interview with the local newspaper, where Sarah could tell her story in a safe and controlled environment. The journalist who interviewed Sarah was a gentlewoman named Patricia Liu, who had been writing for the Millbrook Gazette for over 20 years. She sat with Sarah in the Martinez living room, Charlie resting nearby, and asked thoughtful questions. Patricia wanted to know not just what had happened, but how Sarah had felt during those moments, and what had given her the courage to stay with a stranger who had been hurt. Sarah explained that her parents had always taught her to help others when they were in trouble. Patricia wrote a beautiful article that appeared in the weekend edition of the newspaper. She described Sarah as an example of the values that made small towns special, where neighbors looked out for each other and where even young people understood the importance of compassion. The article also included quotes from Mr. Henderson, who had been the first adult on the scene, and from several of Sarah's teachers who spoke about what a responsible and caring student she was. Meanwhile, the police investigation continued. Detective Torres and her team were working long hours to build their case. They had searched Dale Pritchard's property with a warrant and had found several items of interest, including the same type of rope used to bind Mr. Callahan and muddy work boots that matched prints found at the scene. They had also discovered threatening text messages Pritchard had sent to Mr. Callahan in the weeks before the attack. The evidence was mounting, but Pritchard continued to insist he was innocent. Mr. Callahan's condition improved steadily. Within a week, he was moved out of intensive care and into a regular hospital room. His children had all arrived and were taking turns staying with him. Mrs. Callahan called Sarah's mother several times to provide updates and to reiterate how grateful the entire family was. She mentioned that Robert's memory of the attack was becoming clearer as his physical health improved, and he had been able to provide more details to the police. Sarah visited Mr. Callahan twice more during his hospital stay. On her second visit, he was sitting up in a chair by the window, looking much stronger. He told Sarah about his years as a teacher and shared stories about students who had gone on to do remarkable things. He said that teaching had given him purpose and joy, and seeing young people like Sarah made him believe in the goodness of the next generation. Sarah listened carefully, feeling honored that this kind man wanted to share his memories with her. During that visit, Mr. Callahan also told Sarah something important. He said that on the evening he was attacked. He had been thinking about the property dispute with Pritchard and had decided to try one more time to resolve things peacefully. He had walked over to Pritchard's house to talk, but when he arrived, Pritchard had been drinking and became immediately aggressive. Pritchard had grabbed him, threatened him, forced him into a truck. Mr. Callahan remembered being driven to the warehouse area and being tied up and left there. Pritchard had told him that he would teach him a lesson about interfering in other people's business. This testimony was crucial for the investigation. Mr. Callahan had now clearly identified his attacker and described the events in detail. Combined with the physical evidence and the threatening messages, the police had enough to charge Dale Pritchard with kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. Pritchard was arrested formally, and his bail was set extremely high due to the serious nature of the crimes and his history of aggressive behavior. The news of the arrest brought relief to the community. Many people had been frightened by the idea that someone dangerous was still out there. The fact that the attacker had been caught and would face justice helped everyone feel safer. For Sarah, knowing that Mr. Callahan had been able to identify his attacker and that justice would be served made everything feel complete. She had played her part, and now the system was taking care of the rest. At school, Sarah's classmates continued to treat her like a celebrity, but gradually things began to return to normal. She was grateful for this. While it had been nice to be recognized for doing something good, Sarah was not comfortable being the center of attention. She preferred quiet activities like reading and drawing. And she was happy when her lunch table conversations went back to talking about homework and weekend plans instead of the rescue. Charlie also became famous in Millbrook. People would stop Sarah on the street to pet him and take pictures with him. The local pet store owner, Mr. Jackson, even gave Charlie a year's supply of his favorite treats and a special collar with a little medal that said Hero Dog. Charlie seemed to enjoy all the attention, wagging his tail enthusiastically whenever someone praised him. Sarah laughed and told people that Charlie was a good dog, even before he became famous. 2 weeks after finding Mr. Callahan, Sarah's family received an invitation. Mr. Callahan was being discharged from the hospital and was going home. He and his wife wanted to host a small gathering at their house to thank Sarah, Charlie, Mr. Henderson, and the first responders who had helped save his life. The invitation included a note in Mr. Callahan's handwriting, saying that it would mean the world to him if Sarah and her family would attend. The gathering was held on a Saturday afternoon. The Callahan house was a modest but charming home with a large backyard filled with flowers and fruit trees. When Sarah and her family arrived with Charlie, they were greeted warmly by Mrs. Callahan and her 3 adult children. Mr. Callahan was sitting on the porch in a comfortable chair, looking much healthier than he had in the hospital. His bruises had faded and his eyes were bright. The afternoon was filled with good food, conversation, and laughter. Mr. Henderson was there with his wife, and several police officers, including Detective Torres, attended as well. The paramedics who had responded that morning also came. Everyone shared their perspective on what had happened, creating a complete picture of the rescue and investigation. Sarah listened to the adults talk, learning details she had not known before. At one point, Mr. Callahan asked everyone to gather around. He stood up slowly, leaning on a cane, and gave a short speech. He talked about how fortunate he felt to be alive and surrounded by people he loved. He thanked the police for their thorough investigation and the medical staff for their excellent care. He thanked Mr. Henderson for calling for help so quickly. But most of all, he thanked Sarah and Charlie for finding him and for staying with him when he needed someone most. Mr. Callahan then presented Sarah with a gift. It was a framed photograph of herself and Charlie from the newspaper article, along with a handwritten letter. In the letter, Mr. Callahan wrote about the importance of courage and kindness. He told Sarah that she had demonstrated both of those qualities at a critical moment, and he hoped she would continue to show them throughout her life. He also included a scholarship certificate. Mr. Callahan and his wife had decided to establish an educational fund in Sarah's name that would help her pay for college. When the time came, Sarah was overwhelmed. She had not expected anything like this. Her parents were emotional as well, thanking the Callahans for their incredible generosity. Sarah hugged Mr. Callahan carefully, mindful of his injuries, and told him that she was just happy he was okay. Mr. Callahan hugged her back and whispered that she was a remarkable young person. Charlie barked happily, seeming to understand that this was a special moment, and everyone laughed. The weeks following the gathering brought a sense of normalcy back to Millbrook, though things were not quite the same as before. Sarah noticed that people in town seemed friendlier and more connected. Neighbors who had previously just waved in passing now stopped to chat. The incident had reminded everyone about the importance of community and looking out for each other. Sarah felt proud to have played a role in bringing people together, even if it had come from such difficult circumstances at school. Sarah's teachers began using her story as an example in their lessons. Her English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, talked about real-life heroes and asked students to write essays about everyday courage. Sarah's social studies teacher, Mr. Kim, discussed citizenship and civic responsibility, pointing out that Sarah had demonstrated exactly what being a good citizen meant. Sarah felt embarrassed by the attention but also understood that her teachers were trying to inspire other students. Charlie continued to be a local celebrity. Sarah noticed that when she walked him around town, more people let their dogs come up to greet him. Other pet owners would tell stories about their animals doing remarkable things, as if Charlie had started a trend of appreciating what dogs could do. The veterinarian, Dr. Morrison, examined Charlie thoroughly and declared him to be in perfect health. She joked that being a hero must be good for a dog's well-being. The legal case against Dale Pritchard moved forward. Detective Torres kept the Callahan family and Sarah's family updated on the progress. Pritchard's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was pushing for a trial. Given the seriousness of the crimes, Mr. Callahan would likely have to testify. And Detective Torres warned him that reliving the experience might be difficult. But Mr. Callahan was determined to see justice done, not just for himself, but to ensure that Pritchard could not hurt anyone else. Sarah learned a lot about the legal system during this time. Her father explained how criminal cases worked and why it was important to have strong evidence. Her mother talked about the importance of witnesses and how Mr. Callahan's testimony would be crucial. Sarah found herself thinking about fairness and justice in ways she never had before. She understood now that finding Mr. Callahan had been just the first step in a much longer process. One afternoon, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It was from a national children's safety organization that had heard about her story. They wanted to honor her with their Young Hero Award at a ceremony in the state capitol. The letter explained that each year they recognized young people who had demonstrated exceptional bravery in helping others. Sarah would receive a medal, a certificate, and the organization would make a donation to a charity of her choice. Sarah's parents were thrilled, but Sarah felt conflicted. She appreciated being recognized, but she also felt that Charlie deserved just as much credit as she did. Her parents explained that the award was meant to acknowledge both her actions and her character, and that accepting it would help inspire other young people to act courageously when needed. Sarah thought about this and finally agreed to accept the award, with the condition that the donation be made to the local animal shelter in Charlie's name. The ceremony was held in a beautiful hall in the state capitol. Sarah's whole family attended. She wore a new dress that her grandmother had bought for the occasion, and she carried a photo of Charlie to show everyone. There were 5 other young people being honored that day for various acts of bravery, including a teenage boy who had pulled a child from a burning building, and a girl who had performed CPR on her grandfather and saved his life. When it was Sarah's turn to receive her award, the presenter told her story to the audience. Sarah walked onto the stage feeling nervous, but when she looked out and saw her family smiling at her, she felt more confident. The presenter placed the medal around her neck and handed her the certificate. The audience applauded warmly. Sarah was asked to say a few words, and she spoke about Charlie's instincts and about Mr. Callahan's kindness. She said that heroes were not just people who did big, dramatic things, but also people who chose to help when they could. After the ceremony, reporters interviewed the award winners. Sarah talked about the importance of training dogs well and about listening to them when they try to communicate. She mentioned the animal shelter and encouraged people to adopt pets from shelters because those animals could become wonderful companions and even heroes. Several news outlets featured her interview, and the animal shelter later reported a significant increase in adoption applications back in Millbrook. Life continued to move forward. Mr. Callahan's recovery progressed well, and he began taking short walks around his neighborhood again, though always with Mrs. Callahan by his side. He started talking about possibly doing some volunteer tutoring at the local elementary school once he felt strong enough. The idea of working with children again excited him and gave him something positive to focus on as he dealt with the psychological aftermath of his attack. Sarah visited the Callahans regularly. She and Mrs. Callahan had formed a special bond, and they would often sit in the garden together while Mrs. Callahan taught Sarah about the different plants and flowers. Mr. Callahan would tell stories about his teaching days and offer Sarah advice about school and friendships. These visits became a highlight of Sarah's week. She looked forward to the quiet afternoons spent with the elderly couple. One day, Mr. Callahan showed Sarah something special. He had been keeping a journal during his recovery, writing down his thoughts and feelings about what had happened. He had written several entries about Sarah and Charlie, describing how their arrival had felt like a miracle. He read one entry aloud to her, and Sarah found herself tearing up at his beautiful words. Mr. Callahan told her that he was considering writing a book about his experience and about the importance of community, connections in modern life. The court date for Dale Pritchard's trial was set for 3 months away. During this waiting period, more information came to light about Pritchard's troubled background. He had a history of conflicts with neighbors and coworkers. Mental health professionals who evaluated him suggested that he had unresolved anger issues stemming from childhood trauma. While this information did not excuse his actions, it helped people understand how such a terrible thing could happen in their peaceful community. Sarah thought a lot about Pritchard during this time. She tried to understand how someone could become so consumed by anger that they would hurt another person. Her parents helped her process these complicated feelings, explaining that people sometimes made terrible choices, but that understanding the reasons behind those choices did not mean accepting the behavior. Sarah realized that the world was more complex than she had previously thought, filled with both remarkable kindness and troubling darkness. Detective Torres visited Sarah's school to give a presentation about safety and awareness. She talked about trusting your instincts and about the importance of telling adults when something seemed wrong. She mentioned Sarah's story as an example of someone who had paid attention to unusual signs and had acted responsibly. After the presentation, several students approached the detective to ask questions, and Sarah felt glad that something positive was coming from her experience. The local newspaper did a follow-up article. 3 months after the rescue, Patricia Liu interviewed Sarah again, this time focusing on how the experience had changed her. Sarah talked about feeling more aware of her surroundings and more confident in her ability to handle difficult situations. She also mentioned that she had become interested in possibly becoming a veterinarian or working with search and rescue dogs when she grew up. Charlie had shown her how intelligent and intuitive animals could be. She wanted to learn more about that. Mr. Callahan continued to grow stronger each day. He started his volunteer tutoring at the elementary school, working with third graders who were struggling with reading. The children loved him, and the teachers reported that his patient, encouraging approach was making a real difference. Mr. Callahan told Sarah that getting back to teaching, even in this small way, had been an important part of his healing. It reminded him of his purpose and helped him move forward from the trauma. As the trial date approached, the Callahan family and Sarah's family prepared for what might be an emotionally difficult time. Mr. Callahan would have to testify about what Pritchard had done to him, and Sarah might be called as a witness to describe finding him. The prosecutor assured them that they would handle everything professionally and that counseling services were available if anyone needed support. Sarah felt nervous about the possibility of testifying, but she also felt ready to do whatever was necessary to help Mr. Callahan get justice. The morning of the trial arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. Sarah wore her best clothes and rode to the courthouse with her parents. The building was impressive, with tall columns and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. Sarah had never been inside a courthouse before, and she found it both intimidating and fascinating. Security guards checked everyone who entered, and lawyers in dark suits walked purposefully through the hallways, carrying briefcases and folders. The Callahan family was already there when Sarah arrived. Mr. Callahan looked nervous but determined. His children surrounded him protectively, and Mrs. Callahan held his hand tightly. When Mr. Callahan saw Sarah, his face softened into a smile. He walked over and thanked her for coming, telling her that knowing she was there for support meant everything to him. Sarah told him that she would not have missed it and that she believed justice would be served. The prosecutor, a serious woman named Janet Rodriguez, met with both families before the proceedings began. She explained what would happen during the trial and what they could expect. She told Mr. Callahan that his testimony would be powerful and important. She also informed Sarah that she would indeed need to testify about finding Mr. Callahan and about his condition when she discovered him. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with nervousness, but she nodded and said she understood. The courtroom was formal and quiet. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, and the jury box was to the side. Dale Pritchard sat at the defense table with his lawyer, refusing to look at Mr. Callahan or anyone else. Sarah studied him from her seat in the gallery. He was a large man with rough hands and a weathered face. He looked angry and defiant, even now. Sarah wondered if he felt any remorse for what he had done, or if he only cared about avoiding punishment. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, describing how Pritchard had lured Mr. Callahan to his property under the pretense of finally settling their dispute peacefully. Instead, Pritchard had assaulted him, forced him into a vehicle, driven him to an isolated location, and left him bound and helpless. The prosecutor emphasized that this was not a crime of passion, but a calculated act of violence, meant to harm and terrorize an innocent person. The defense lawyer took a different approach. He acknowledged that his client had made serious mistakes, but argued that Pritchard had not intended to kill Mr. Callahan. He portrayed Pritchard as a man who had been under significant stress due to job loss and financial problems, and whose judgment had been impaired by alcohol. He asked the jury to consider these factors when determining guilt and potential sentencing. Sarah listened carefully, trying to understand both perspectives. Even though she believed Pritchard deserved to be punished, the prosecution called its witnesses over the next 2 days. Detective Torres testified about the investigation and the evidence collected. Forensic experts explained how the rope fibers and boot prints matched items belonging to Pritchard. The paramedics who had treated Mr. Callahan described his condition when they arrived, how close he had come to dying from exposure and dehydration. Each piece of testimony built a compelling case against the defendant. Then it was Mr. Callahan's turn to testify. Sarah watched as he walked slowly to the witness stand and placed his hand on the Bible to swear to tell the truth. His voice was steady as he described the evening of the attack. He explained how he had genuinely wanted to resolve the property dispute peacefully and had approached Pritchard in good faith. He recounted how Pritchard had grabbed him, threatened him, and forced him into the truck. Mr. Callahan's voice cracked slightly when he described being tied up and left in the bushes, uncertain if anyone would ever find him. The defense lawyer cross-examined Mr. Callahan, trying to suggest that perhaps he had provoked Pritchard or had been partially responsible for the escalation of their conflict, but Mr. Callahan remained calm and clear in his responses. He admitted that the property dispute had been frustrating for both parties, but insisted that he had never threatened Pritchard or done anything that would justify such a violent response. The jury seemed moved by his testimony. Several members were visibly emotional. On the third day of the trial, Sarah was called to testify. Her heart pounded as she walked to the witness stand. The prosecutor smiled reassuringly at her and began with simple questions. She asked Sarah to describe her normal morning routine and what had been different about that particular day. Sarah explained how Charlie had behaved unusually and how she had followed him to the bushes where they found Mr. Callahan. She described the condition he was in and how she had stayed with him while trying to figure out how to get help. The prosecutor asked Sarah how Mr. Callahan had seemed emotionally when she found him. Sarah thought carefully before answering. She said that he had seemed scared and in pain, but also relieved when he realized someone had found him. She described how he had grabbed her wrist because he did not want to be left alone, and how she had promised to stay with him. Sarah's honest and detailed testimony clearly affected everyone in the courtroom. Even some of the jurors were wiping their eyes. The defense lawyer was gentle in his cross-examination of Sarah, perhaps recognizing that being aggressive with a child witness would not help his case. He asked a few basic questions about whether Sarah had seen anyone else in the area and whether Mr. Callahan had said anything about who had hurt him. Sarah answered truthfully that she had not seen anyone else and that Mr. Callahan had been too weak to say much at that time. The defense lawyer thanked her and had no further questions. After Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, she felt exhausted but relieved. Her parents hugged her in the hallway outside the courtroom, telling her how proud they were of how she had handled herself. Mr. Henderson, who had also testified earlier, came over to congratulate her on her composure. Sarah felt like she had done her part in helping Mr. Callahan get the justice he deserved, the trial continued with character witnesses for both sides. People who knew Mr. Callahan testified about his kindness and dedication to education. People who knew Pritchard talked about his struggles and difficulties, trying to paint a more sympathetic picture. The prosecutor and defense lawyer each made their closing arguments, summarizing their cases and asking the jury to reach particular conclusions. Then the judge gave instructions to the jury and sent them to deliberate. The wait for the verdict felt endless. Sarah and her family stayed at the courthouse, not wanting to leave while the jury was making their decision. They sat in the hallway with the Callahan family, making small talk and trying to stay calm. Mr. Callahan seemed tired but peaceful, as if testifying and confronting his attacker had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Mrs. Callahan kept checking her phone nervously, though there was nothing new to see. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury sent word that they had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. The atmosphere was tense and electric. Sarah held her mother's hand tightly as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. The foreman read from a piece of paper, stating that the jury found Dale Pritchard guilty on all counts, including kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs. Mr. Callahan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Mrs. Callahan squeezed his hand and whispered something in his ear. The judge thanked the jury for their service and set a date for sentencing in 2 weeks. Pritchard showed no emotion as he was led away by court officers. His lawyer patted him on the shoulder, perhaps offering some words of consolation. Sarah watched it all, feeling a complex mix of emotions. She was glad that justice had been served, but she also felt sad that anyone's life had gone so wrong that they would commit such a terrible act. 2 weeks after the verdict, the sentencing hearing took place. The courtroom was less crowded this time, with only the families and a few reporters present. The judge listened to statements from both sides before announcing the sentence. Dale Pritchard was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The judge stated that while she acknowledged Pritchard's difficult circumstances, his actions had been deliberate and could have resulted in death. The sentence reflected the seriousness of his crimes, while still offering him a chance at rehabilitation and eventual release. Mr. Callahan stood and addressed the court. He said that while he could never forget what Pritchard had done to him, he hoped that prison would give Pritchard time to reflect on his actions and work on becoming a better person. This statement surprised many people, including Sarah. She had expected Mr. Callahan to be angry and vindictive, but instead he showed compassion even toward the man who had hurt him. It was a powerful lesson about forgiveness and moving forward. After the sentencing, life in Millbrook gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The news crews left, and the daily routines of the small town resumed. But the events of those months had left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Sarah found that she looked at the world differently now. She paid more attention to people who might need help. She noticed when her classmates seemed sad or troubled and made efforts to reach out to them. The experience had awakened something in her, a deeper awareness of both the fragility and the resilience of human beings. Charlie remained Sarah's constant companion and best friend. Every morning they still walked the same trail where they had found Mr. Callahan, though the area no longer felt frightening to Sarah. Instead, it felt like a place where something important had happened, where lives had been changed for the better. Other dog walkers often joined them, and the trail became a popular spot for the community to gather and exercise their pets. Someone had even placed a small marker near the spot where Mr. Callahan had been found, with a simple inscription thanking Sarah and Charlie for their courage. The scholarship fund that the Callahans had established for Sarah grew through donations from community members who wanted to contribute. Local businesses added to the fund, and even some people from neighboring towns who had read about Sarah's story sent checks. By the end of the year, there was enough money to cover a significant portion of Sarah's future college expenses. Sarah's parents were overwhelmed by the generosity and made sure Sarah understood how fortunate she was to have such support. Mr. Callahan's volunteer tutoring program expanded. He worked with the elementary school to create a structured reading support program that paired struggling students with volunteer tutors from the community. Many retired teachers joined the effort, inspired by Mr. Callahan's example. The program became so successful that the school district considered implementing it in other schools. Mr. Callahan told Sarah that this positive development had grown directly from his recovery process, and he credited her with saving not just his life, but giving him the chance to create something meaningful in his remaining years. Sarah's family grew closer through the experience. Her parents made more time for family dinners and conversations, recognizing how quickly life could change and how important it was to cherish their time together. They took a family vacation. That summer, traveling to the mountains and hiking together, Sarah brought Charlie along and they explored new trails and enjoyed the beauty of nature. The trip gave everyone a chance to relax and reflect on everything that had happened at school. Sarah's teachers continued to reference her story when teaching about character and citizenship, but Sarah had asked them to focus less on her individual actions and more on the broader lessons about community and helping others. She did not want to be seen as special or different from her classmates. She wanted everyone to understand that they all had the capacity for courage and compassion when circumstances called for it. Her teachers respected this wish and adjusted their approach accordingly. The animal shelter that had received the donation in Charlie's name used the money to improve their facilities and expand their adoption programs. They created a special program called Hero Pets that highlighted the remarkable things that adopted animals had done for their families. The program was incredibly successful and led to dozens of additional adoptions. The shelter director invited Sarah to be their youth ambassador, and she accepted, visiting the shelter regularly to help with events and to encourage other young people to appreciate and respect animals. Detective Torres became a mentor to Sarah. The detective would occasionally invite Sarah to visit the police station and learn about different aspects of law enforcement. She introduced Sarah to canine officers and their dogs, showing her how dogs were trained for police work. She also talked to Sarah about different career paths in public safety and criminal justice. These visits sparked Sarah's interest in possibly working in law enforcement someday, though she knew she had many years to decide on her future career. 1 year after finding Mr. Callahan, the town of Millbrook organized a community celebration. It was not specifically about Sarah or the rescue, but rather a general celebration of community spirit and looking out for one another. The event featured food vendors, live music, and activities for children. Local organizations set up information booths, and the police and fire departments gave demonstrations. It was a beautiful day that brought the entire town together. During the celebration, the mayor gave a speech acknowledging several community members who had made positive contributions over the past year. She mentioned Sarah and Charlie, Mr. Henderson, the first responders, and many others. But she emphasized that every person in Millbrook played a role in making it a caring and connected community. She encouraged everyone to follow Sarah's example by staying aware of their surroundings and helping others when they could. The crowd applauded warmly. Sarah felt proud to be part of such a special place. Mr. Callahan and his wife attended the celebration. Mr. Callahan was walking without his cane now, and he looked healthy and happy. He spent much of the day talking with former students who had come to see him, and Sarah could see how much joy these connections brought him. At one point, he pulled Sarah aside and told her that he wanted her to know something important. He said that surviving the attack had taught him not to take any day for granted. Every morning he woke up grateful for another chance to make a positive difference in the world. He credited Sarah with giving him those mornings, as the sun set on the celebration. Sarah sat on a bench with Charlie beside her, watching families pack up their belongings and say goodbye to neighbors. Her parents were talking with the Callahans. Nearby, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Sarah thought about everything that had happened over the past year and how much she had learned. She had discovered that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to act with courage and compassion. She had learned that communities were stronger when people looked out for each other. And she had realized that even difficult experiences could lead to positive outcomes if people responded with grace and determination. Charlie rested his head on Sarah's lap. She stroked his soft fur. She whispered to him that he was the real hero of the story, the one whose instincts had started everything. Charlie's tail wagged gently, and his eyes looked up at her with complete trust and affection. Sarah smiled, knowing that whatever challenges life brought in the future, she would face them with the same spirit that had guided her on that fateful morning when she followed her dog into the bushes and found someone who desperately needed help. The story of Sarah, Charlie, and Mr. Callahan became part of Millbrook's history. Told and retold to new residents and two children growing up in the town, it served as a reminder that heroes were not just found in movies or books, but walked among us every day. And it reinforced the simple but powerful truth that paying attention, caring about others, and taking action when someone needed help could literally save lives and transform communities. Sarah carried these lessons with her as she grew older, and they shaped the person she would become. Someone who understood that the most important moments in life often came when we chose to help someone else, even when it was difficult or frightening to do so.